Bienvenue, welcome to another live stream with myself, Gareth Wax of Many Purple Hats, and Hamish McLay of Search and Convey, a gentleman who is no stranger to the iniquities of the modern home buyers market. But today, we're talking about a curious topic, which is all about buyers' inquiries. Pray, what do you mean by this, Hamish?
Well, I thought it was a part of the worth speaking about, because it can be one of those things which can attract some rather interesting sort of responses from both sides of people trying to work through their conveyancing process. And naturally enough, it's I did send a little sort of article out sort of earlier today, giving us sort of some of the amusing ones, because what will happen when somebody goes to buy a property, the person who's selling it has to put certain information out there for them to be able to sort of understand what they're buying into. So they get this in particular information. It's in part upfront information. We'll speak about upfront information another day. In fact, that might well be worth a topic of conversation when we have our property quorum, because it does involve all parties who are involved and helps all parties who are involved. So the whole, so if you like, somebody's buying it already has the information or some of the information. However, they and their solicitor will want some clarity on some matters which weren't explained to them in the first place.
Yes, it's only human nature to leave out a couple of elements, but purely by mistake and not by design.
Oh, absolutely. And what it is, and of course, there's such a vast variation in the types and the styles of property. And whilst they aren't, I mean, a block of flats, they're not exactly going to be unique. However, within that particular type of environment, they'd be pretty much the same within that block of flats. But so you might ask the same questions about that block of flats, but someone in a house next door, in a house next to a park, and a house on the edge of a cliff, or there could be so much within those variations. Now, unfortunately, once those questions are asked of the buyer or the buyer's solicitor, they have to be answered.
Right.
Because otherwise, if you like, a risk is being taken on, which was, if you like, inappropriate. They've been asked for a particular question. They become part of what is going on within that particular sort of contract between the buyer and the seller. So they have to be answered. And unfortunately, some of them are remarkably flippant, remarkably daft. And you ask yourself, what on earth are they asking these questions for? Now, interestingly enough, we ourselves, we don't get involved with the legal side in terms of the work that we do at Search and Convey. Fortunately, we leave that in the hands of very, very experienced people like Juliet, who speaks on our property quorum. But we still get questions because we carry out searches on behalf of the buyer.
Right.
A seller doesn't need any searches, of course.
Right.
Because so that's one of the transactions which are completely missing from what they need. They don't need searches. It's their property after all. But they are, and of course they forget about it, because in actual fact, they sometimes forget that they need to get answers to these questions. And very, very often, and when we speak to our sort of the legal team about it, when we speak to Juliet about it, she would actually sort of say, that can hold up because they are not responding, because the question is being asked of them, and they can sit on those questions. And of course, if you've got a solicitor, or if you've got a conveyancer, I should say, that's not. And I think this is a challenge as well, because something I've noticed of late, I don't know if you've come across it yet, Gareth, it's interesting the conversations we have with different people, that there's a big sort of blame sort of scenario going on.
Yes.
Solicitors will blame solicitors. Solicitors will blame estate agents. Estate agents blame solicitors, and conveyancers, licensed conveyancers, blame everybody.
Be careful, Juliet will be bristling when she hears all this.
but I mean, she knows she's the first one to admit it, because unfortunately she has to work with solicitors as well. In life, there's good and bad of everything.
Well, that's true.
Unfortunately, you cannot standardize the questions because they're going to vary between the properties. Now, here's an absolute cracker. About a year or so ago, I was involved with, and I'd actually sort of helped as one of our clients. They wanted to sell. It was a little plot of land,
right?
And all it was, a little plot of land that they were going to do some market gardening on, but they never got round to it. Okay. And they were going to sell it back to the original owners, and all they wanted to do was keep ponies on it. And
all sounds fair enough so far.
Absolutely, it wouldn't have been so bad. They lived almost next door to each other in the same village, and it was the price of the price. It was ludicrous. It was well under 20 grand, the price of this particular sort of piece of land.
Right.
And so in the end of the day, it took nearly 4 months for that transaction to actually sort of go through. It was going to be a cash transaction for the exact sort of amount. So there was no mortgage, absolutely nothing complicated, no estate agents, no Rowan Wallace sort of in the middle of all of this to sort of hold it up and freak away. No, absolutely, it was just so straightforward, or should have been. There were nearly 200 questions to answer. They had this standardized form, and they were asking you, and you had to. The thing is, it had to be answered to be accepted because it was the buyer's solicitor that had asked these particular questions, and out comes this particular sort of form, and it was asking us about the bathroom, and the electrical supply, and all of these particular. So it went through all the rooms that one would have in a house, but here's this plot of land. But it was unbelievable. Now, that was filled in with all of those particular sort of questions on, and then they came back with even additional questions on it. Now, fortunately, I did sit down with Claire, and I did help her out technically. Well, I'm not legal, so I could actually sort of, but it was absolutely manic, this whole particular thing. And as I said, it was so absurd. But what it is, it's a way of what we want to try and do, of course, is get practical about it, because at the moment there isn't a firm rule of what needs to be asked, what has to be asked. And the challenge with that, if somebody wants to ask an almost sort of insane question, and in actual fact, my article earlier on that I sort of sent out on LinkedIn covered a few of that particular ones. And I think that the best of them we had several actually when we'd count looking at searches. If you've got a flat on the first floor, they're really not going to have a conservatory. But one of the standard sort of questions that you sort of asked, in fact, it's not a standard question. I don't know. We'd have to have Juliet in our midst to be able to tell us about this particular sort of one. But they'll very often ask the question, does the property have a conservatory? Now, quite obviously, if it's on the first or the second floor, you could have it on the ground floor, I think.
You probably could.
But I remember particularly, I sort of fell into this particular sort of chat with a flat we were working with in Witney, not terribly far away from where we are in Oxfordshire. And that question was asked there, did they have a conservatory? And it is the trouble is the time that's spent. You need to look at it two ways, because you've got information going backwards and forwards, relative to get the answers on this particular sort of thing. And one of the things I noticed earlier, there are still some people who will only accept responses either by way of fax.
Right.
Now they're be sort of, they're dying off, and I'm not so sure whether it's this year or next year. There won't be any fax machines anyway.
No.
So they've got to be sent through either by fax or by post. Now, when you look at this sort of day and age, and they should be electronic forms, so we need to look at this particular sort of facility. So it's a matter of trying to tidy up what people are asking and what really needs to be part of that, part of the contract, if you like, that people are actually sort of buying into. Because when you've got questions like this, it's not so bad if you've got a very proactive solicitor,
right?
And a very proactive, but in fact, what you really need is proactive. So you need the right people. You really need so many things just to sort of line up.
Well, it is about that, is it? It's about making sure you have all your ducks in a row. I think buying a house is very much an element of not running at things, but actually preparation. I think it's the clearest illustration of how preparation prevents pretty poor performance. You know, if you get the solicitor genned up, if you get the conveyancer, if there's one in between, with all the right information, the search is done. If you get everything in place, you know exactly what you get everybody ready to go, the estate agent ready, whatever, and then you hit go. It shouldn't take that long, but the problem is there's often elements in that whole chain of command that either haven't been taken into account or just weren't known about.
I think, and one can understand it to a point. Surely there are certain things you come out, oh, crikey, is that the case? But you need to be careful as to, because sometimes you can give away too much information.
Right.
Because it's not right to sort of keep in the dark. I mean, one of the questions that that was on there this morning, when I was putting stuff together this morning, was one of the ones I came across, which was rather amusing. And the question on that actually come from the solicitors was to the effect that, are you moving because you have noisy neighbours, effectively? Are you disturbed by is that one of the reasons why you're moving? Was asking about the neighbours. Now, of course, if you answer the question yes, you get yourself into a very, very serious mess then, because you've got to put an admission down there what it was. So if you give away too much information, and that's when the too much information sort of is not the best sort of way forward.
Well, sometimes the information you give can cause the other person to make a bunch of assumptions.
Yes.
And that's where that starts the ball rolling in completely the wrong direction. So I think you need to give all the information, but in bite-sized chunks, if you see what I mean, and let them consume that, and then on to the next bit. We give it all. I mean, I've got an example in case in point with us. We were buying this place. It's right next to a pub. Now, immediately, that sounds like a terrible idea. Why would you buy a place that's right next to a pub? Well, the pub is owned by a Chinese restaurant and has not functioned as a pub in a year. And it's unlike, in fact, all the way through lockdown. What am I talking about? In the last 3 years. And looks unlikely to work that way again. They're looking to either turn it into, to knock it flat and create some small housing setup, or what's more likely is they're going to take the existing hall that's in there, do it up, and then and separate into sections. This is all fine and good with me because I'm a businessman and I would like to have a hall next to me. So it's actually it works very well for me. But from the initial viewpoint is I've got a pub right next to me. That might put a lot of people off without understanding the ramifications. It's about understanding the information in such a way that you don't run before you can walk, I think.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what it is, and I think what can be the major challenge with this isn't necessarily the amusing questions that can be asked, or even unnecessary questions. What it can be if people do not get those answers back.
Well, yeah.
It can actually sit there, and very, very often it can be that buyer he's the one who's desperate. Sorry, not the buyer, the seller who's desperate. They want to be selling their property so they can move on and do things.
Right.
That's it. When you get a quick inquiry coming back, and their solicitor says, "Oh, look, we need to answer these questions. Could you get to those answers for me, please?" They disappear off the face of the earth. They'll go on holiday. They do all these things and disappear instead of answering the questions. That should be primary focus. Get the questions answered.
Yes, it should be.
If you're working with a conveyancer who is tied up in one of these factory sort of type processes, and of course all they've got is a whole stack of papers, or perhaps their files on their computer these days.
Right.
But they're not going to get round to it for another 10 days, because that's sort of where it happens to sort of be, because they're overburdened with it. And unlike that true professional who keeps on top of things and keeps pace with everything that's sort of going on. So really, it can be a very, very complicated thing that messes the whole process up for weeks.
I think it comes down to something you said in a previous section. If you use local experts who are not part of the machine, but have their own mind, who are genned up, who know what needs to be done, and you communicate with them effectively, you are far more
Absolutely.
likely to get the kind of result you're looking for. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what we can actually sort of say, and we know it ourselves from the experts that we get along to the quorum, if you get the types of people that we actually sort of engage with, invite to actually sort of speak, because they're very much on top of their game, and therefore they will interact perfectly. Well, I say perfectly, as effectively as they can.
As
Because
effectively as they can. I think that's what we can say that.
yeah, because where's perfection? But however, it's trying to do the best when you can with the best
Right.
information you've actually sort of got, and just keeping the whole thing moving. And as Chris will very often, there's so many moving parts, but we need to. It's like a watch, isn't it? If some
Well,
of those parts stop, the watch is pretty darn useless.
well,
So too,
if you don't get those parts to all talk to each other, then the system gets clogged up, and then once again it's ground to a halt. You have to keep everything talking to each other.
we have
Yeah,
indeed. Well, I think we're going to have to pull things to a close now.
it's been yet another very useful meeting. Hamish, thank you very much for the subtotal of your experience. It really helps
But we
me.
should
And I
say,
think, oh, go on.
very briefly, we've got our meeting next week when we have our experts around us.
True. Okay, well let's do an unashamed plug for that, guys. If you want to hear more interplay between members of the same profession but all doing slightly different jobs on both sides of the fence, lawyers on one side, mortgage brokers on the other, estate agents, building specialists, and of course developers, and of course Hamish, who sits right in the middle of it all, trying to keep it all together. If you want to hear some really useful conversation, please do tune in. 10 o'clock, every 10 o'clock, every Thursday. All you've got to do is navigate to the top of Hamish's or my profile, and you'll find it'll be going on there. We also welcome feedback. I mean, people keep coming up to me, or when I'm in other meetings, saying, "Oh, what's that property thing you do?" And I say, "Well, do you watch it?" And they say, "Yes." Why don't you comment at the time? Oh, well, I wouldn't want to come across as, oh, but if you guys can give us information that will better direct us about what is you need here, the answers to questions that you need to ask. So bear that in mind. Until next week, Hamish, thank you once again. And guys, do join us next week also on Property Quorum, which of course is 10 o'clock every Thursday. Just navigate to the top of my profile. Until then, thank you very much, and have a wonderful weekend. And of course, I wish everyone safe mental health. Bye bye now.